All right, let's open up to John chapter 1. John chapter 1. Well, I want to thank you for choosing to participate in this adult Bible class. You guys are on it tonight. That's good. I expect lots of comments then. My hope for this class is that by the end of the quarter, you'll have a greater appreciation for who the apostles of Jesus Christ were and a greater admiration for them. Their role in God's plan is extremely vital. Notice I said it is vital, not it was. It is vital to God's plan, and it reaches us today. Every time we pick up our Bibles and we read their writings, every day when we make decisions in our lives about our behaviors and our actions and our words, and if those actions and words are influenced by the teaching of the apostles, their work is touching us and having an effect on us. So their work really is immensely important. So I'm hoping that you'll have a greater admiration for them. We're not studying the apostles as individuals. We're studying them corporately, as a team. What were they doing as a group? And as you are aware, probably, David Roper is helping me teach this class this quarter, and I'm looking forward to working with David, and I know he'll have some good things to share as well. So tonight, we're going to talk about the apostles' early interaction with Jesus. Specifically, we're talking about 5 of the apostles, possibly 6, but 5 of them and their early interaction. We'll point that out as we go along. So in John chapter 1, we're going to begin in verse 29 and working through the rest of the chapter. We're not going to be reading every verse. If you had the material ahead of time, I hope that you were able to read through and think about the lesson a little bit, and I hope you're prepared to share some thoughts from your studies with the class tonight. So John the Baptist came as the forerunner for Jesus, preparing the way for him and making ready the people, the hearts of the people to receive the teachings of Jesus. And he has been calling people to repentance. He has been baptizing people for the remission of their sins, which is certainly a preparatory thing for what Christ and his apostles are going to be doing in just a short time. Now, chronologically, as we come to John 1 and verse 29, Jesus has already been baptized by John. Although John's gospel does not tell us, it does tell us some things about the event, but it does not tell us when it happened as the synoptics do. John's gospel rather gives us some reflections of John the Baptist on that event, which we'll see in just a moment. So John will explain what he experienced at the baptism of Jesus, but at this point chronologically, his baptism has already happened. So in John 1 and verse 32, John will say, "I have seen the Spirit descending as a dove out of heaven, and he remained upon him." That's when he's reflecting on what happened at the baptism of Jesus. Now, first question in your material: what did John the Baptist understand about his own role in God's plan? Consider also John 3:27-30. There's a lot of things we could say about that. Let me get the ball rolling. Did John understand what his purpose was? Yes. He knew what his role was, to come and be a messenger. As he said that in verse 23, when the Jews were coming out and asking him, "Well, who are you? Are you Elijah? Are you the Christ?" And John would answer, he said, "No, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord." Now, as John understands what his purpose and role is, based upon these passages in John 1 and in John 3, what are some things you might say about John the Baptist? What kind of person was he? What was his character? Humble. I'm so glad. Who said that? Okay, good. Arlene said that. Why do you say that? What in the text shows you that?
Just to say, it's not me that you need to be following.
Okay. So John would say, there's someone who's coming after me who's greater. I'm not even worthy to take his shoes off. That's a statement of humility. You also have in John 3, and this point is the reason I included the John 3 passage. You remember in John 3 and in verse 27, John said, a man can receive nothing unless it's been given him from heaven. That's a statement of humility. But so is verse 30, where John says of Jesus, he must increase, but I must decrease. When John says that in chapter 3, he's acknowledging my role is diminishing because Jesus is here and now his role must increase. So John is a man of humility. All right, what else do we know about John in these verses? Okay, he's fulfilling the charge God gave him to do. Dad? Good. Okay, another statement of humility. John mentioned that he is a friend of the bridegroom, and there's more we could say about that, but we don't have time. But the idea is that John is saying that he finds joy in the fact that Jesus is now fulfilling his role, and John was able to help him in his work. Notice this about John. In John chapter 1, John the Baptist understood that because he must decrease and Jesus must increase, John needed to transition his disciples to Jesus. You see, he's pointing them to Jesus, right? So in John chapter 1 and in verse 35, John was standing with two of his disciples, and he looked at Jesus as he walked, and he said, "Behold the Lamb of God." Then the two disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. Why? Because John pointed them to Jesus. Understanding that this transition would have to take place. Surely John's disciples have heard him say many times these things about the coming one. Oh, there's another coming after me who's greater than me. I'm not even worthy to take his shoes off. He will baptize with the Holy Spirit and fire. John's followers would have heard him say that repeatedly. So they are expecting someone to come along later. And so, of course, it's fitting then that John the Baptist would point out that one and say, it's time for you to stop following me and go and follow him. So John is fulfilling his role. He's fulfilling it in humility. He is pointing his disciples to Christ. And the two disciples here in verse 36, verse 35 and 37, we know the name of one of them. Who was that? Andrew. Okay, so Andrew is named in verse 40. One of the two who heard John speak and followed him or Jesus was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. Now, who was the other one? How do you know that, Barry? Barry said it was John, the writer of the gospel. How do you know that? Can I put you on the spot?
All right. Throughout this book, he does a lot of little reflections in like a third-person type of commentary.
Okay, that's right. I don't know that we can just conclusively 100% prove that it is John the Apostle, but there are multiple times, in fact 7 times in this book, where the writer, it obviously is John, he says something, but he doesn't name himself. And the evidence leads us to think that it is John, so maybe this is instance number 8 where that happens. So let's just say prevailing scholarship does say that this is John. Let's go with that. Andrew and John are followers, disciples of John the Baptist, and he points them to Jesus, and so they go and they pursue Jesus. So in verse 38, Jesus saw them, Andrew and John, following. All right, and they have a conversation. Verse 39, they ask, where is he staying? And Jesus says to them, come and you will see. Notice in verse 39, it says that they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. Now, there's some difficulty here about, is this Jewish time or Roman time? I think most scholars think it's Roman time, which means this would be 10 o'clock in the morning when they have this interaction with Jesus. And so it says they spent the day with Jesus. They've spent the bulk of the day with him. If it was Jewish time, it'd be 4 p.m. And so that wouldn't leave them so much time to spend together. I don't really have a strong opinion about that. But in verse 40, we know that one of them is Andrew. We think the other one is John. Now, question number 3 in your material. After Andrew met Jesus, what did he do next? He went and found his brother, Simon, who is about to be named Cephas or Peter. So look at chapter 1 and verse 41. Andrew found first his own brother Simon and said to him, we have found the Messiah, which translated means Christ. Andrew's first reaction after meeting Jesus is to go and tell Peter. Let's make a point from this. The ones that you and I are most likely to have an influence upon in the cause of Christ are those that are already close to us. Those that are already within close proximity to us. Maybe family members, maybe close friends or co-workers. Andrew went and told his brother. We are much more likely to successfully point people to Jesus who are close to us than we are total strangers. Now, as sure as I say that, somebody's going to say, well, I remember this one time where I met this guy on the subway. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. But the odds are better when we go to those who are already in our sphere of influence. So in verse 42 then, Peter comes to meet Jesus. Jesus says in verse 42, you are Simon the son of John, you'll be called Cephas, which is translated Peter. All right, so at this point, we've got 3 men who've been introduced to Jesus: Andrew, John, Peter. Now let's meet another one. Question number 4 on your handout. How was Phillip introduced to Jesus? And what did Phillip do after meeting Jesus? How was Phillip introduced? Did John the Baptist point him to Jesus? No. Yeah, Jesus found Phillip, right? It says the next day Jesus was traveling and he found Phillip, and he said to him, this is verse 43, follow me. Now, we're going to see this again. This is what Jesus often does when he approaches people. Follow me. He makes that simple 2-word command. I don't think that Philip is a complete stranger to who Jesus is, though. I mean, think about it. If a total stranger came up to you and said, Bill, follow me, how likely would you be to actually do that? I don't know that they're total strangers here. In fact, let's think about this a little bit. What do we know about Philip from this text? Okay, I can't hear whispers. What do we know about Philip from this text? He's from the same town. Okay, so this is from verse 44. He's from Bethsaida, of the city of Andrew and Peter. Do you think they knew each other? Do you think Philip maybe knew Andrew and Peter? Possibly. We can't prove that, but possibly. They are from the same town. Now, if they knew each other, we know that Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist. Is it possible that Philip may too have been a disciple of John the Baptist? Which, if that's true, then that means he would have heard all the things John the Baptist has said about Jesus. So when Jesus came to him and said, follow me, Philip would be much more likely to do that. because he already has some of the groundwork laid through John the Baptist. I know that's a little bit of speculation, but we're going to see some other things in just a moment when we get to Matthew or Levi that may support that a little bit. So, now we've got 4 people. But the second part of question number 4, what did Philip do after he met Jesus? He did the same thing Andrew did after he met. Andrew went and got Peter. Philip went and got Nathaniel. So this is verse 45. I want you to notice the 2 claims that are made. Look at the claim that Andrew makes when he went to find Peter. He said in verse 41, "We have found the Messiah." That's quite the claim. Now look at what Philip says to Nathaniel in verse 45. "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." We have found the Christ. It's essentially the same thing that Philip says. He doesn't use the term Christ, but of whom did Moses in the law and the prophets speak? The Christ. They're essentially saying the same thing, but do you sense the confidence of these guys? We found it. We have it. We know this is the one. This is pretty incredible that these guys on such brief interaction with Jesus would make these claims. Now, Nathaniel is a little bit of a skeptic, isn't he? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Jesus of Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? So Philip says, "Come and see." Now, question number 5 in your material. How did Jesus describe Nathaniel? And I need you to tell me what it means. What is he saying when he describes Nathaniel this way? How is he described? He's an Israelite, yes, but that was true of everybody in that area, right, for the most part. But what specifically is he's an Israelite in whom is no guile or in whom is no deceit? What does that mean? He's a genuine Israelite. He's not just a nominal Israelite. Oh, well, I'm a descendant of Abraham. That's what the Pharisees often claimed. Nathaniel was a genuine Israelite. There's no deceit in him, Jesus says. Now, Nathaniel's response to that is, well, you don't know me. How can you assess my integrity? We've never even met each other before. So then Jesus really confuses him, and he says in verse 48, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." When you were sitting under the fig tree earlier today, I saw you. So now Nathaniel says, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel." Is it that big of a deal that one person sees another person sitting under a fig tree? There must be more to this than just simple, "Oh, hey, I walked by and I saw you sitting over there," right? I mean, if someone came to you and said, "Hey, Tim, I saw you at Walmart today," you would say, "Well, why didn't you say hello?" Okay, big deal. You were at the same store that I was. You said, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." There must be something else going on here, right? Joe, what is it?
I think Philip framed him. Philip told him more than he said here when he called.
I suspect that's probably true. Yeah? Something about what Jesus said has made Nathaniel sit up and recognize something's different about you. You're special. You are unique. Jesus is perhaps telling him things that he should not have been able to know. And so Nathaniel is realizing there's no way you could know these things if you were not the Son of God, the King of Israel. Now we've got to talk about verses 50 and 51 before we move on, because you may have had some questions about this, or you may have thoughts you want to share about this. So Jesus said in verse 50, "Because I said to you that I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see the heavens opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." Nathaniel, I'm going to show you things that would really shock you and surprise you. I'm going to show you the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Somebody tell me what that's talking about.
Jacob's ladder.
All right, give me some more.
Oh, that's all I have.
Okay, all right. So he says Jacob's ladder. Y'all help us. Let's fill in the story. What's going on? Jacob, patriarch, is traveling. And while he's sleeping, he has this vision, right, of a ladder that goes from earth up into the heavens, and he sees these angels going up and down on the ladder. You think that's what Jesus is talking about here?
Could be a reference to that, and it goes along with calling him an Israelite, which is what Jacob's name was changed.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I do think this is a clear connection to that patriarchal story, but what's the implication? What's the conclusion that we should draw from it? Why is Jesus talking about this?
Jacob's vision, he was not just traveling, he was fleeing the wrath of Esau, headed for Haran to be with family, to get out of Dodge and away from his brother. Jacob is not, to me, not a very likable man in his childhood. This seems to be a turning point in his life, where he suddenly wakes up and realizes who and what God is, and it changes him. And I think Jesus, in a similar way, is telling Nathaniel, this is a turning point in your life. You are going to be changed by your interaction with God.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I can't repeat all that if you didn't hear it, but that's good. What do ladders do? Yes, I'm so glad you said it that way. They give us access. Access to something that's out of reach. What did Jesus come to do? He came to give us access to that which is out of reach. The eternal, the heavenly. He came to give us that access into the wealth and the riches of God that because of our sin we had been prevented from accessing. I think this is an illustration about the bridge between God and man that Jesus provides, and He gives us the way to get into the heavenly bliss that God has for us. I think what Alan said is also very, very helpful. There may be lots of things going on, but ladders grant access, and I think that has a lot to do with why Jesus came to earth, to make it possible for us to have access to God. You think about John 14:6, right? I'm the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I'm the ladder. I'm the access. Okay? All right. Yes?
I agree with everything that's being said. I think that's a good take on that. Just an interesting point. You know, one of the last things they see with Jesus, like in Acts chapter 1, is the ascension of Jesus into heaven.
Right. Yeah.
There could be some allusion to this too. You know, that, I mean, they're going to walk with Jesus all the way to that time comes when He ascends into heaven, and the angels are there from heaven, and they're going to see that too. And I think that's kind of an interesting tag on that as well.
Good. All right. Okay, so at this point in John 1, we know of 5 men who have had an encounter with Jesus. Andrew, presumably John, Peter, Phillip, and Nathaniel, who's also named Bartholomew. Yeah, okay, good. So we know of these 5 people. Something else to consider. Andrew immediately went and found his brother Peter. Which one of these 5 men also has a brother who would become an apostle? John. All right? Is it possible that just like Andrew went and found his brother, did John go and tell James, his brother, about this too? So now we possibly have 6 men who are having an early interaction with Jesus. 5 of them we know for sure, potentially 6. So at this point in John 1, Jesus has not officially called his disciples. We're going to come to that in just a little bit. But he has met about half of them, 5 or possibly 6 of them. And these men are going to follow him around. They're going to observe some of his miracles. They're going to hear some of his teachings. But they're not his apostles or disciples in that official kind of a way just yet. That's coming. We know that because chronologically, when you piece the life of Christ together, the calling of the 12 will come later. But also, when we turn to Luke chapter 5, when we meet these guys next, they're going about their regular occupations of being fishermen, as is the case with Peter and James and John. But Matthew, who will be called a little bit later in chapter 5, he's still working as a tax collector. They've not left their occupations to go and begin following Jesus. So, Luke chapter 5, Jesus comes to the Sea of Galilee. The crowds are pressing around to hear him teach. And so he gets into Simon Peter's boat, and he asks Peter to put it out from the shore just a little bit so that he can remove himself from the crowds and have some space to breathe. And he's going to teach the people sitting down in the boat. That's what the first few verses of Luke 5 tell us. And after Jesus finished teaching in verse 4, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Now, I'm going to ask you a thought question that's not in your material, okay? So I apologize for that, but I wanted us to kick this around a little bit because I think it's worth considering. Here's the question. I see at least 3 possible hindrances to Peter's obeying Jesus' command to go out, spread the nets, and go catch some fish, go launch out into the deep. I can think of at least 3 reasons why this would have been counterintuitive for them to do. Can you help me think through that a little bit? What are some things that you see here that would have made it easier for Peter to say, I'm not going to do that? They were already washing their nets, right? They've already been out fishing. They've come back. They're getting ready to wrap up, right? So it's inconvenient. What else? They fished all night, and they didn't catch anything. We don't know where the fish are, but they're not out there. All right? So they've already experienced failure. What else?
Jesus was a carpenter.
What does Jesus know about fishing? He's a carpenter. Peter's been a fisherman all his life. What does he know about this? Okay, Dad? Oh, okay, Jesus was not a fisherman. Okay, so it's inconvenient. They've already experienced failure. They're tired. We worked hard all night, and we caught nothing. So there's several reasons why Peter might have said, Lord, this really doesn't make sense. We're not going to do this. But to Peter's credit, that's not what he does. He says, nevertheless, at your word, we will spread the net. So he's to be commended for that. But the point I want to make with us from that is sometimes the commands of God come to us in a point in our life when we're weary, when we've experienced failure, or when it's inconvenient. But we still need to obey the commands of God because his ways are best. And Peter understood that, even though, as Peter will say in a moment, his faith is not what it should have been. Now, I'm going to skip through some things here for time. After Jesus miraculously brings in this catch of fish, and Peter makes his profession about how he is unworthy and he's sinful, Jesus calls them to become fishers of men. He says in verse 10, "From now on, you will be catching men." And when they brought their boats to land, they left everything and they followed him. No longer will you fish for fish, but now you will fish for men. Now here's another thought question that's not in your material, okay? But think about this. By what power were these men unable to catch fish? By their own, right? They fished all night, they worked hard, they caught nothing. By their own power, they were not able to catch fish. But by whose power were they able to catch fish? By God's power, they were able to successfully catch fish. Do you see a lesson in that concerning fishing for men? I think that's worth considering. All right, now, notice in verse 11, they left everything and they followed him. That's not an exaggeration. They gave up their livelihood, they gave up their occupation, and they began to follow Jesus. Later in the chapter, verse 27, he went out and noticed a tax collector named Levi, also known as Matthew, sitting in the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he left everything behind and got up and began to follow him. I'm going to assume that Matthew also has some introduction to Jesus already. I don't think Jesus is just a total stranger when he says this to these men. But Matthew does the same thing that the others did. He left everything behind and he became a follower of Jesus. And at this point, these men are going to give their lives to the Master and let him teach them and train them. So now let's go to chapter 6 and let's wrap this up. Chapter 6, it's, yes ma'am, please. Yeah, okay, Wileen's comment was that these men left everything to follow Jesus, and yet sometimes it's a struggle for us to give up the things that are convenient for us in order to do that. That's a good point. All right, so I want you to notice this really quick. Chapter 6, verse 12. It was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer to God. Why did he do that? Because in verse 13, when the day came, he called his disciples to him. He chose 12 of them, whom he named as apostles. And here is where these 12, we would say, officially become the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. Okay, very good. With the exception of this lesson, all of the lessons will be 2 class periods in length. This is the only one that we condensed down into one lesson. So David will be teaching next week, Lord willing. So thank you, and I appreciate your help tonight.